We're standing on a parcel today that experienced the 2017 Tubbs fire. Post-fire, we walked this land with registered foresters and several arborists to talk about how do we specifically manage regenerative tree growth. You might be asking, why is it important to manage these trees and all of these stumps? Specifically because they all come back. There's a massive system of roots below the soil that's still living, and within 3 or 4 months, the tree will start showing new growth. Now, some of that growth will come back on its own without us taking care of it. Other parts of that growth will need to be thinned and separated over years so it has a strong attachment to the tree. Also, we have to worry about foragers over time that will continually coppice the trees down to the ground year after year, not allowing them to grow back. Today we're going to look at trunk regenerative growth and how to keep the grazers and foragers out of those spaces until we need them and can invite them back in to work with us. All right, today we're fortunate enough to have Merlin Schlumberger with us, who is a board certified master arborist and also a licensed consultant. And Merlin teaches at the local junior college. So thanks for giving us some time here, Merlin. And today we're going to talk about this oak woodland and how we want to protect some of the trees.
All right, well, thanks for having me. We are in an area that burnt pretty severely 5 years ago. This presumably was a big oak tree that died from the fire. The above ground portion of the tree died from the fire, but the roots did not die, and it sprouted back from these roots. Deer cage was installed around it to keep the deers from munching the new tree growing, but this tree's growing well, and we can see it's grown through the deer cage. And you can actually tell the lower parts of the tree are munched by deer. And if you go a little bit higher, they're not. It's not that the deer can't eat this stuff. It's just that's a little easier and they have plenty to eat. So presumably at this point, if the fence was gone, the tree would fare just the same. There's also a lot of the tree that's a little ways above the deer browse range, so that the fence is probably no longer necessary. We'll head over to the oak tree that we'll be doing a little bit of work on today. So here is another coast live oak. The previous tree we saw was also a coast live oak. The cage was just removed and all of the understory branches were all cut off. If we don't do anything else, it's developing into a multi-stem tree. Many of these limbs are gonna get big, and if we don't do anything, it's gonna be harder for it to become a great big majestic oak tree. We would like to have this hillside become a beautiful oak woodland. So we need to select what's gonna be the single leader of this tree, and everything else is either gonna go away entirely or gonna be reduced and go away gradually. But here we have the old stump, and where this cut is gonna rot and decay. So if we choose any of these 3 or 4 stems along the edge of the old stumps, this old tree is gonna be attached to a piece of rotten wood. It's gonna make it a less structurally sound tree, which is too bad because this stem is the thickest one. So it would otherwise be a good choice to keep it. So we're gonna look, one of the things we'll look for is a stem that's further from the cut. So one of these could be good. We also want to look for a stem that's thicker and taller and definitely above deer browse range. So I'm going to start by reducing it just so we can see what's going on. So now this stem is a lot shorter, and the other stems are going to be able to assume dominance. We're not really concerned about proper cuts here, because possibly next year, or maybe later, maybe sooner, depending on how we manage this, we'll cut it down. This is not part of what we call the permanent structure of the tree. My favorite branch to keep as the permanent tree is gonna be this stem right here. It splits into 2 up here, but it leads to this, which is one of the tallest ones. It's one of the furthest ones from the damaged stem. In this instance, I'll probably cut about 1/3 of the other branches off, and I'll reduce lightly another 1/3 and severely the last 1/3 to make sure that this branch is the tallest stem. There is an argument for removing entirely all but this stem we want to keep, because that way you may not have to revisit it. It's a one-time thing. So depending on the level of management and maintenance you want to do, it could make sense to stress the tree a little by removing all but the stem you want to keep. Or if you want to reduce the stress on the tree for a little more work, doing it gradually over the course of several years. Okay, so this could be a finished product for now to be revisited maybe in a year or two to remove the rest of the lower stuff. Certainly keep the deer cage off now, and maybe the deer can start doing the maintenance of removing the lower canopy. Probably in 3 years max. All of these side stems I will probably remove at the ground, retaining only the part of the tree that's shaking here. Everything else will be gone, and the branches that develop are going to go over and get big and start shading this lower stuff anyway. So the lower stuff's not going to serve a purpose to the tree, and the tree's going to put its resources towards putting new leaves where there's full sun, which is up in the higher canopy. That can also shade the ground, which can create what fire scientists call a shaded fuel break, to keep the ground temperature cool and to actually reduce the spread of a fire, even though there is fuel in the air. All right, so this is what can happen if you do not cage a tree. The deer will keep munching what they can get. They keep munching what they can get, which is stressful to the tree. But sometimes, eventually, there's a little spindly center stem they can escape, and then this tree's above deer browse, and they can keep chewing on that. It's great. They can do the maintenance. The only thing that you can do if you wanted at this point would be, like the other trees, to select a leader and reduce or remove the other ones. So we're done. The single cut really did the trick for this tree that was not deer caged. It might have grown a little faster with the deer cage, but the maintenance is a lot easier. A lot of it is going to depend on your deer population and how hungry they are. Now we'll go take a look at one of the madrone trees. So here we're a little further out on the property. This is not near front and center. And we have a Pacific Coast madrone. The tree died from the fire. The old stem was cut down. And we have 5 years of growth. There was a cage in here that was removed maybe last year. And now we're ready for the final pruning. Because this area is not as visited and as heavily maintained, we're going to go heavier on the pruning. It's a little stressful for the tree, but that might mean that we never have to really revisit it. This one here is my choice. It's pretty much the tallest. Maybe this one's slightly taller, but it's thicker. Its branches out well. It's pretty vertical. Also, it sprouts out from a little further from the stump as the other ones. I think I'm going to keep this tree as our permanent tree and remove all the other ones. So now we're left with a single stem tree. We could do a little pruning on it because it's helpful if one of the stems is significantly taller than the other ones. It'll develop a better structure. So I'll make a few smaller cuts to make sure the central stem stays the tallest part of the tree. And now we have a tree that may not need any more maintenance and can develop into a big, beautiful madrone over time. We'll head on over to this stand of bay trees to take a look at how to prune those. So here we have a bay cluster. Also 5 years after the fire, it's done really well and is really a multi-stem tree that, if left unchecked, is going to keep its many stems, which can be fine. If you look through forests that have previously burned, many of them have many stems, and that's okay. They're more likely to fail, but it's not the end of the world. It could still create a healthy forest, so you really don't need to go through all of your woodland and select a single tree per cluster, but it will help the tree's long-term structure if you do. So we could do that to this one to show you, as well as this one is tall enough that we can remove some of the lower parts of the canopy to break this fire ladder from a possible ground fire into a canopy fire, and we know bay are oily and flammable, so it could be nice to avoid that. So we'll select a stem. There is one stem on the closer side that's a little bit bigger and taller than the other ones, and it comes from a little further on the trunk, so it's a decent choice. Okay, and we're left with a single stem bay tree with a nice leader that goes up from the bottom of the stem, leads to the very top. We've removed a lot of leaves, a lot of photosynthetic materials lost, so that is stressful to the tree, but now all of the tree's remaining energy can go to the permanent structure of it. It's set up to be a much more sound tree that's less likely to fail over time. Here we've got a pile of green brush that next week is going to be brown brush and much more flammable than the tree was when it was connected to the roots. So if you don't have a plan for your brush, you might be better off doing nothing and leaving it connected and hydrated, connected to the roots and hydrated. You can chip it if that's possible. Wood chips are much less flammable than brush, and you could use wood chips in a landscape environment or in a or to make compost with it. It's not an end-all be-all solution because wood chips are also flammable, just less so. You can take it into a municipal composting facility that will turn it into compost. If your locality permits, you can make burn piles, and that can work, especially in areas that are too far and remote to bring in chippers. So there's a lot of things you can do, but you really want to have a plan for the brush before you start doing any cutting. Now down in this gully, you can see really thick, vigorous sprouting from a lot of bay trees. Bay leaves are fairly oily and quite flammable, and the trunk's really thin, so they die quite readily in a fire, and then they resprout very, very vigorously, as you can see. The deer have been nowhere able to catch up with this regrowth. In an ideal woodland in coastal California, you'd have a large tree with a good amount of space till the next tree in a mixed aged forest, but really enough space between the tree that a ground fire can cruise through, burn some of the understory, and not impact the bigger trees with thicker bark. So maybe thriving for that 30 to 50 trees per acre, really good spacing, and then selecting where and when you find them, any of the black oaks or white oaks or valley oaks or blue oaks, any of the oaks we have here, or madrones that are less flammable, and try to favor those and remove the bays near them. But yeah, lifting the canopy, simplifying the stems so that more of the canopy is higher up in elevation would be my recommendation for this woodland.
Well, I hope you got a few good takeaways today and enjoyed the information from Merlin. It's important to remember that this land has a long history with fire, one that the Pomo, coastal Miwok, and Wapo people used wisely to create healthy ecosystems. And we can work together with the land to steward a regenerative growth system and manage our trunks and tree species to bring the land back faster than we even think possible.